Yes, so thank you for the intro, and thank you, CyArk, for inviting me to come along today. I am head of IS, as Ruth said, for Historic Royal Palaces, and I look after the IS for the 5 palaces the Historic Royal Palaces look after. So that's Hampton Court Palace, Tower of London, this magnificent place we are here, Kensington Palace, Kew Palace, and Banqueting House. As a charity, we're self-funding, so we take no money from the government, and we're here to basically help everyone explore the story of how monarchs and people have shaped society and some of the greatest palaces ever built. You can see on the screen our cause and our objectives, and critically for this event, we've got the one around guardianship, which is to give the palaces a future as long as the past. A little bit about me. I've been in IT for an awfully long time, probably since I was about 16, so I'm pretty much your IT geek turned professional, I guess. I've worked in many sectors, the oil and gas industry, aerospace, retail, and now heritage. And I think for me, it's all about delivering IT into the constraints of the sector you work in. In the oil and gas industry, we're very much regulated by the Health and Safety Executive. In heritage, the sector, it's English heritage. We have some magnificent buildings. We can't just chuck IT in. We have constraints. But ultimately, IT now is at a point where I think we can do anything that is asked of us, and it's about what we do. It's about how we can use our minds to decide how to exploit IT. And some of the stuff we've seen over the last couple of days as part of the CyArk conference has just been amazing, and I think it just goes to show you that there's so much opportunity now with technology. And now, I know this is the after lunch session, but I'm just going to do a little bit remind about how computers store information. This is only 2 slides, so don't worry too much. But I just wanted to remind everyone that ultimately a computer only works in ones and zeros. So all this amazing data we're collecting, when it comes down to it, it gets stored and it gets put down into ones and zeros and put into either the memory of the computer or onto a hard disk. In the old days, there was ASCII, the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. And what this basically says is that the letter A is represented by 65, or 1 and 5 zeros, 1 in binary, B is 66, C is 67. Any coders here will probably have recognised Hello World as being the first bit of code you ever coded. The important thing about this is that it doesn't matter how we create that Hello World. We now save it in many formats, and each format has to be remembered. So we can save it as PowerPoint. It takes up 37K in this example. Save it as a Word document. It's 13K. If we just save it as text, it's 1K of computer counting. I think it's actually 12 bytes. So this is fundamental to computers. Everything we do now, everything we capture gets put onto disk and uses up a lot of space. And we have to always remember how we've stored it and what the code is that we've stored it with. And I guess we're going to say now, why is this important? And you're probably looking at me thinking this is going to be quite a long afternoon. And this is important to us because in this sector particularly, we live in changing times, and the world has just transformed. I've seen, in my time in IT, I've seen IT go from being some useful things to help finance systems to being everything we do. We've moved into the digital world. The PC has arrived, digital cameras have arrived, we use email for communications, we've got digital radio, we've got digital TV. Everything we do now is digital, and this has been very much a paradigm shift. In the old days, it was all about how do we archive our documents. We have photo libraries, we have document libraries. Some people at their desk here, I've never seen one of those before, but on Google, you can find images of desks that look like that. It was a real, it's always been a real challenge storing our documents. Copying was difficult. We have to have photocopiers. We had to fax it to people. Searching was difficult, and there's a huge risk around flood and fire. And particularly with photos and the older photos, they degrade with time. So, those were the worlds we were in, and things have moved on, and definitely for the better. Looking at digital photography, we've seen the demise of Kodak, but it's a good example of the changing world we're in. We've moved from 35mm film to 16 gigabyte memory sticks. But what we do now is we take hundreds of images of the same thing, and they're all labelled DSC something or other. So you know, it's the new technology, but it does give us a real challenge from a storage perspective. And this, you know, you can see from the images below, you know, just in 20 years, storage has moved from floppy disks to 3.5-inch disks to memory sticks and various different types of memory sticks. So, you know, technology is keeping up with it, but it is quite a challenge. And as part of that challenge, you know, we've had the advent of data centres, you know, and you know, the sector's sort of responded to this ever-increasing need for storage. So we've got data centres, we've got cloud storage, we've got email that we use, and we store documents within email. We've got smartphones that we store documents in. And we've actually moved to what I would call a semi-paper-free office. I mean, you know, we could do offices without paper, but I think we always like, in the way I'm sat here, to have a bit of paper in front of us. So, but our worlds have transformed. And this is very much good news, I think, for everyone around, really, because as IT people, we like to store things and we like to archive things. And best practice now, we'll always see multiple copies of data stored in multiple locations. You know, and it's definitely better than a filing cabinet. So, you know, I think you know, we've definitely moved on, and you know, the IT sector is delivering, I think, a good service from the point of view of can we store the data, and can it be backed up, and is it secure? And digitalisation is again, it's good for conservation, and we've seen here in this conference how fantastic new technology is changing the way we can do conservation and preservation, and it really is amazing seeing the uses. And everywhere I look, I can see how technology is just genuinely transforming how we can use it to preserve the palaces we work in, but also across the sector. The challenge with it is being able to reuse those assets, you know, and again, it's fantastic being able to scan them, but once we've got that data, we've got to be able to reuse it. And then as we look at how how the technology is evolving, you know, we can see high dynamic range photography developing, and 3D laser scanning, you know, put them together, and we're getting some amazing data sets of some amazing quality. And then we've seen over the last couple of days also the arrival, and in the last couple of years really, of 3D printing or adaptive manufacturing or additive manufacturing even. And again, this is just another dimension, I think, to the digital world we're in. And again, it's almost, you know, it's introducing, I think, a new paradigm really in how we go about our business, and particularly how we go around manufacturing. I would question, will this do to manufacturing what digital did to photography? And I genuinely suspect it will. But one of the risks is it's going to be another set of file formats and another set of instances of data to be managed. And I can only foresee that there's just going to be more data, more formats, and more standards. And you know, you could say this is good news, and it is good news. It's a step forward. And very much 3D printing is, you could say, is going to be the perfect partner to the laser scanning and the world we live in. But you could also say that it could actually be the perfect storm from a data perspective. And I think for me, this is a real challenge. And as I've moved into this sector, because of our obligations to look forward and think about how future generations will be viewing us and accessing the assets we create, I think we really are heading towards a perfect storm when it comes to data and data storage and assets. And here I'll show you a couple of slides on the data challenge, really. You know, it is ever-increasing amounts of data. Everywhere you look, I've presented graphs to my executive board around the increasing amount of data that the organisation is using. Initiatives we've done, we did a proof of concept with CyArk on some 3D scanning at the tower, and it's 250 gigabytes of data, and that was a proof of concept of 2 of our chapels. That's a lot of data, much more than we've ever had to deal with as an organisation. We've got new formats, we've got old formats, we've got archives, we've even got archives of archives, and the challenge of cloud storage and email. And cloud storage in itself is interesting because it's very new for us now. Everyone's putting data into the cloud, storing it in the cloud, but what happens if one of the cloud companies goes bankrupt? You know, what's the precedent for what happens to the data that we've stored there? Is cloud storage going to become like a utility, so rather like electricity and gas? In which case, what happens when the costs go up by 10%, like we've seen recently in the UK? You know, it's great that we're using this technology, but it's uncharted territory in many respects. And then, of course, we've got email again, which is another challenge around archiving and keeping data and recording conversations that happen. And so I guess for me, it's going to be, how do we find the data that we're storing? How do we find the rich assets? And also, and more importantly, how do we ensure we can read it in the future? And that is, and it is something that, as in HRP, as we've evolved our digital strategy, it's become really clear that it's easy to create the assets, and we can do some fantastic storytelling with them, but we have to work out how to store them to get the most out of them. And if we don't come up with a solution on this, we're going to end up with petabytes of digital assets that we can do nothing with. We won't be able to search them, we won't be able to read them, and we won't be able to back them up. There'll just be so much the data to look at or look after. And petabyte is 1,024 terabytes. I had to research that, but I knew it was a lot. So, and within HRP, we've done some work as part of our digital strategy to try and quantify how big the challenge is. And we have 1 million digital assets in the organisation at the moment, and that's going up, literally every month. 673,000 images. You can see the stats there. But all organisations have this challenge, and certainly companies I've worked with previously, we've always had challenges around data and storage. But for us, we have to think about the future generations looking back on us, particularly in this sector. And we do just keep adding to it. And this is a graph I showed to the executive board a couple of years ago, and the latest one shows an even bigger spike. So it's just, there's a relentless increase of data. And so I guess we have to start thinking about strategies around that data, and critically around how do we find it, how do we read it, and how do we store it. And we have to look at it strategically, because this is about changing changing our organisations to be ready for this data and to be in a position to manage it. I used to work in the retail sector and department stores. I used to work for John Lewis, and taking a step to one side, if you look at an e-commerce site, John Lewis have 250,000 products on their website. Every one of those is searchable. Every one of those has a taxonomy behind it that allows you to find it. And their business process ensures that any new item or any new product that goes onto that website is correctly tagged and correctly located within the taxonomy. And that's a mindset they had, and they had to develop that for the success of e-commerce and selling product. And I guess for us, in our sector, we have to make sure that as we create these assets, we develop standardised naming conventions. We develop the taxonomies to help us find the products. And there are a number of sort of template taxonomies around, but we have to choose them and standardise on them. And we also have to look at document and image management systems and how do we manage the information we have. From a Google perspective, I'm just showing this Google appliance. They do an appliance that kind of Googleises your own assets in an organisation. They painted it yellow, I think, to make people buy it, but it's basically a computer which runs their Google software on it. And it's a good appliance. It's been around for many years now, but I think gradually people appreciating the need for it. And there's other sort of documentation and collaboration tools around that a lot of organisations have, but the key thing is actually adopting them and using them. And then moving on, as we look at this, we've got to look at sort of digital continuity. This error message, I think people are going to see more and more as they start to try and open up documents from the past. I think it's a real problem, and certainly in the last 20 years, there have been a lot of formats that we've stored our data in, and we've now lost the ability to read that data back. And so, for me, we've got to develop a strategy around how are we going to store the data, but also how are we going to read it. Are we going to use some of the archive formats that have been developed, like PDFA? But again, some of those emerging standards have got standards and substandards. I certainly know with 3D laser scanning, there's some standards around the archive format for them. But we've got to think about this now and have strategies around it, because if we don't, we won't be able to find the information. And then it comes down to archiving as well, coming up with an archive strategy, I guess. Many IT sectors, in a lot of sectors I've worked in, you readily delete your data. Some of it you have to delete it, some of it you have legal obligations to. So the Data Protection Act says you have to refresh or delete data every 2 years. Financial records, companies can delete them after 6 or 7 years, depending on how you count it. In some organisation, that kind of is good news. It removes the liability. But in our sector, we feel obliged to keep our documentation for many years. But how long do we keep it for? what is the duration? And if it's anything more than a few years, whatever we're storing our information on is going to change. And so we have to come up with strategies that regenerate and restore the data again and again onto the new technology. We have to be sure that with the cloud companies we use that they're doing this. And certainly Iron Mountain, in speech they did yesterday, they have an obligation to do that. But it's a critical aspect of it, because if we don't do it, we'll have piles of disks that we can't read. And certainly, I know I've been asked every now and then, over many years, people have come up with an old disk and said, I need the images of that or something, and you just can't, you just can't read it instantly. You have to find a way of reading it. And I guess for me then, we have to start acting now on this, and certainly my challenge in the organisation, I think the challenge to the sector, is to make sure that we do have strategies around search and around digital continuity and around archiving. And I'd far rather we agree them at the start and engage with them now than have to retrofit them, which is very much a challenge we've got now in many organisations. We have to remember that if you can't find your digital asset, you may as well not have it. And certainly when organisations say they're asset rich, they're only as rich as how easy it is to find the information. And I do think with this as a challenge is, looking forward at the modern, what an archaeologist will be doing in 50 years' time. Will the archaeologists be uncovering sort of ancient monuments and things like that? Or will they actually be digital forensics experts who are looking at hard disks and trying to work out what did we store there and why did we store it and what format did we store it in? And when I put this slide together, I kind of thought, that's an idea I had. But actually, the more I think about it, the more I think, my time is still here for many years to come, because we're still going to be looking at ones and zeros and people trying to understand exactly what's on these systems. So it's a real challenge. And I think, we've got the right, hopefully there's the awareness of it. And I certainly know some of the work CyArk are doing with their GIS solution, and a number of other companies are recognising the importance of how we storing the data so that future generations can read it, and that it is regenerated and reformatted in line with the standards or emerging standards. So sort of drawing it to a close, we really do have to adapt a new mindset. We've got to start thinking, how am I going to find the assets, or how am I going to share the assets? What format shall I save them in? And where am I going to store them? And we've got to think of this. It's both now, and it's an immediate challenge for organisations to do it now, but also for future generations to look back. And if we get it right, we're going to see a step change in organisational efficiency as documents are shared. We scan once, reuse many times. We use the same, you take a photograph once and reuse it. We reuse assets for interpretation and storytelling as well as conservation. And the future generations will be able to review and understand genuinely the amazing times we live in, and how challenging it's been for us with all the new technology and bringing it forward. And if we get it wrong, I guess they'll just wonder what we did for 20 years, because they will just have a pile of disks. And that's me pretty much finished. I think I do have a final thought. And this is, we are moving to a stage now, and I'm very much not a historian, I'm very much a technical person, where history now, we need technology to read it. And so everything we're doing now, I think we have an obligation to acknowledge that we've now got to start creating technology that we almost bundle up with the data, because a lot of the, up until now, we haven't needed technology, but now we do. And I do wonder, whether that's going to be a real challenge to us in the future or not. But we do have a presumption now that technology is here forever. And that's that. Finished.